Welcome, everyone, all 49 of you.
All right.
I think it's just you and me again, John. So,
Okay. I will watch the chat. If anybody types anything in chat, I will
and we can
mention it.
misbehave if we want. I don't think anyone's going to. Think they might quite enjoy it.
Okay.
So, I was communicating with somebody yesterday
Hmm.
who had attended one of my Knowledge Cafe workshops a little while back. And I'd asked him, "Hey, how's it going? Have you run any knowledge cafes?" And he came back and said, "Well, I'm no longer involved in knowledge management. I've got no opportunity to run a cafe." To which my reply is, "Well, why don't you make one?" And it just reminded me of a more general issue is that people think they need to be working in KM, first of all, to run cafes, or we're still, to take a more conversational approach to their work. If they're not in knowledge management, then hey, there's no real conversation.
Hmm.
And again, it also reminded me of one particular story some years ago. I was invited up to London, to London University. Damned if I can remember which one that was, a long time ago. And they developed a new knowledge management course that they were proposing. And they'd invited maybe a dozen people up to review the course to see, how they could improve it, whether we thought it was worth running. And we were seated in a little room, nice lecture theatre rows, and somebody at the front with a PowerPoint deck took us through the proposed course and then simply said, okay, so comments, thoughts, how can we improve it, what's wrong, etc. And I'm thinking, this is crazy. We're not going to have a conversation in this room. What we're going to do is have a transactional kind of yes and no between the lecturer at the front
Hmm.
and the individuals in the room. So I didn't get any chance to speak to anybody else in the room. And I thought, well, this didn't have to be a cafe, but it could be cafe-like. He could have given us some time to have a conversation amongst ourselves. We could have all sat, it's small enough, we could have all sat in a circle and had a big conversation together. But it wasn't a conversation. It was a series of transactional monologues. And I didn't think it was a terribly effective way of drawing out the knowledge in the room and giving them the sort of feedback that they want. But then I think back to my corporate life. Most meetings are not conversational. They're a similar format. There's the boss, the manager at the front of the room, everybody sitting in the room, and then this, what do you call them? Serial monologues.
Hmm.
And it goes very, very deep in the culture.
Hmm.
And so my thinking was, hey, this will make a good topic to discuss with John, because John would have had this experience as well. How
Hmm.
do we how do we go about changing things? How do we go about making everyday work life more conversational? It hasn't got to be formal knowledge cafes or anything. It's just how do we make it more conversational? So
Yeah.
my opening question to you, what are your immediate thoughts on that?
Yeah, thanks. It is a fun one. Um, my very first one is that, in the past two recordings or live streams, we've done that top and tail. So I think this is kind of fun to,
Oh, we forgot top and tail, didn't we?
we still could, but I think it's kind of fun to maybe try it different this time and like
Yeah.
flow the conversation. So just noting that. Um, yes, I guess where my mind goes is something like you and I talk about this all the time. And now I've been an external consultant for 8 years in 2 weeks. Um,
Congratulations.
thank you. Uh, so like I guess I'm just not quite. I hear things sort of third hand. Now, sure, I'm in client meetings, but I'm in client meetings as an external consultant, which
Hmm.
is those meetings are treated a little bit differently
Yeah.
than a bunch of internal employees. And there are times when I'm talking like this, exactly like you, and people will say to me, "No, no, no, like I don't." When was the last time you were an employee? Because my meetings are, the way I hear you saying it, my meetings are conversational. But then here's what happens for me. I say, oh, great. So, like, what type of conversational process or what does it look like? Great. I'm glad to hear they're conversational. What does it look like? And then I don't know how to politely say, when they break it down a little bit, it's the boss talking at them for 55 minutes. And then 5 minutes at the end, does anybody have any
In a
questions?
Q&A. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like,
And
okay, so
they
now,
and they think that's conversational.
right. And I'm trying to think where do I start? So that's one thought I have is like, are things more conversational now or not? I'm not quite sure. Um, and the other one, I'm kind of losing it. Uh, yeah, there was one other thought on like the meetings are, they think they're conversational. Um, yeah, I don't know. I had one other thought that came with it too. So,
Mhm. But
uh,
simple things like, after action reviews at the end of a meeting, and again, they haven't got to be formal. They can be informal, where you simply ask, okay, let's just take a few seconds to review how this meeting went. What went well? What didn't go so well? What, how can we improve next time? I mean,
open it up.
it
Yeah.
hasn't got to it hasn't got to fit whatever the five questions should be. It
All the five
hasn't got to
questions.
be
Yeah.
caused an after action review. People don't do it.
So agile project management is certainly more conversational than traditional project management
I would
by
hope so.
design a little bit. So like the ceremonies they run, like one of the ceremonies is a retrospect. And the retrospect in theory, this wasn't the point I was going to make a second ago, but it's close. The retrospect in theory is, a way of getting feedback on how did the entire, well, in knowledge management, it's how did the entire project go. And agile project management, it's how did this scrum go, or how did the last week or two, or how did this task go? And people are talking about it, but they're not. Do you know what I find in reality? I don't know. You and I haven't ever talked about this. When I attend those ceremonies, do you know what they look like for me? Not always, but usually they create like a Miro board or a mural or a jam board or even worse, like an email. And they just say, hey, everybody add to this list what went well for you.
Oh,
So it's
yes.
not even someone at
Oh,
the front of the room speaking.
ah,
It's like a text-based conversation, which is really just a text-based list. And that's it.
probably no one ever looks at.
And there's no back and forth. There's no like, well, here's how what I liked and what I felt. It's just like, well, you voiced your opinion, end of retrospect.
Yeah. I mean, the other one that's I think very powerful is is the concept of a huddle, which is also a
Mhm.
software concept. Just bringing people together each morning for a few minutes or key points during the day, just to have a check-in.
Mhm.
Stand up really quickly, just to see how everyone's feeling. I just that there's an interesting. I'm on an interesting email list from Peter Block, who is one of my favorite gentlemen.
Mhm.
And he was sharing a few stories, and he was sharing one story with schools that do that at the beginning of the day. They have a check-in with the students to see how everyone's feeling, whether there are any sort of problems that individuals have got. And they also had something I think I think it was called a restorative. It probably wasn't called this, but it was something like restorative justice classroom
Mhm. Okay.
room, a restorative justice room. Where again, if there was trouble with a individual student, rather than going into detention or being reprimanded or what have you, they brought the people involved into that room to sit down and to have a conversation to figure out what the problems were. I mean,
Mhm.
just simple. These are such simple ideas, but and yes, some organizations, educational systems have adopted them, but so few. I just find it very. I don't understand, especially when people are aware of them and they know about them, and they probably know from their own experience just how frustrating, being talked at is that they don't more. People don't seem to do more about it.
This might be the point I was trying to make earlier. Balance is the word I want to use. So one of the things I've learned in facilitating public classes is there is some decent percentage of the population that actually prefers exactly what you and I are sort of,
Yes.
they really want two,
Yeah.
3, 4 days of content.
They want the
because
content. They want to be
because they
talked at.
because they don't have time to go read it or find it, or they view the value as us curating, us finding the perfect content, presenting it in the perfect way, and then I think they're quite happy. I don't really know if they think about it or sleep or talk about it, days, weeks later, maybe, maybe not. But I, I I remember in classes I used to say speak exactly the way you're talking now and say, I'm so proud. This is a 5-day class and there is zero PowerPoint. And I would say, I don't know, making up a number here, 75% of people would say, wow, that's amazing, cool, great. There was a good 20, 30%
Yeah,
of people that would say there's no structure.
there's no structure. There's
Oh
no content.
no. You
We're just going to chit chat for five
Yeah, we're
days.
just gonna do nothing. Yeah. What am I paying for? What is this? Because and I don't know if that's so in deep in the culture or just and you and I have talked about this. I wonder,
It's going back to school days, isn't it? It's the way that most of us were taught.
and at some point we really have to do some real research on this, I think, or ask somebody, or I don't know, partner with a school or something, and just see like what percentage of people, those the Dr. Ed Schein levels of conversation. I think we've even talked about it here before. Like, what percentage of people have spent their entire life only ever having transactional conversations?
Yeah,
I
yeah, we've
don't know
often
because
talked
I
about that.
I guess I assume families and loved ones and intimate partners have deep conversations, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure they do.
I'm not so sure either.
They might just be arranging schedules and planning out days and getting tasks done.
Yeah,
And that might be the extent. Like, I'm not sure.
but I think one of my favorite quotations from Plutarch: the mind isn't a vessel to be filled;
Fire to be kindled.
it's a fire to be kindled. That was it. Thank you. Thanks for finishing it for me. Maybe the likes of you and I need to do a little bit more kindling. Um,
Yeah. So we have to definitely give credit to, well, Nancy White and others, but I always think of Nancy for liberating structures.
yes, well, again, there's a whole range of them.
Yeah,
I just mentioned a few that are my favorites, but there's so many different ways of engaging in various forms of conversation for various purposes.
which takes us back to where we started the conversation. Like, okay, so I'm not in a KM job, so I can't do this anymore. Well, you're in meetings, I think.
Yes.
So how can we make it a more conversational meeting and try and liberating structures? The one that I've often used as an example is like a town hall. I think town halls are still run to this day, where like a senior leader or two or three sits in front of a group
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
dozens or hundreds of
No.
people and talks at them. I had one that used to read speeches. That's how she did it. She would write a speech and she would read the speech. And I often thought, maybe you could like email the speech and just, we could read it. But there's something in the delivery, of course, and the shared experience of hearing the speech and all that kind of stuff. But the point I'm trying to get to now is like, I'm not sure people feel empowered to go to someone and say, here's the town hall. I think we should make this more conversational. I think you run the risk of getting laughed at. That's not of value. And there's a couple other things I got to bring up. Like I think people like control and predictability. And here's
A
the 10
tone hall
slides.
is nicely controlled. Yeah.
Yeah, like here's exactly what's going to be said. And then I did talk about this in a recent, maybe you and I did too. Um, someone projects onto the audience and then says, a week or two later, well, we talked about that. We had a conversation about that.
No,
No.
you didn't. You
So
didn't.
that always brings me back to I do think something else that you and I maybe this is to the point of if we do close with like how do we further KM? I do think you and I probably need to put something out in the world, even though, I think it's hard to put anything out that we find that valuable, but something that sort of looks at quality of conversation. Because
Yeah.
maybe what you and I need to come to is like some kind of like I don't know, appreciation for the rest of the world to say, okay, sure. So if somebody talks at you for 55 minutes, that's a conversation. Fine. We'll include it in conversation, but we're going to include it really low on the list of like asynchronous,
And you got a spectrum from talk at to
yeah,
talk with.
very ineffective, it takes you 20 more years to make sense and from
But for
that.
me, just coming back to what you were saying earlier about people, not having the courage to say suggest turning a town hall into say a cafe,
Hmm.
a former cafe, which wouldn't be so difficult to do, is um, if you're the CEO and you've got that idea, or you're a senior VP and you've got that idea, yeah, you've got some authoritative clout, some persuasive powers. You can make that happen. If you're lower down the organization, clearly you can't, but you don't try to do it. You take a look at what you're doing, how you're interacting with people, and think about, okay, how can I make the interactions, the everyday interactions I'm having with people, less talk at and more talk with, if you like. How can we make it more engaging? How can we make it interactive? How can we make it more conversational within my sphere, within my domain? Um, and it hasn't even got to be during work time. There's a guy, I'm going to forget his name now. He works for, I'm going to forget the company as well.
Perfect.
Ah, damn it. It's there in my head.
Uh-huh.
Here's a knowledge manager for an organization in China, and he started running what he called BBC's Break the Book clubs, and basically it was cafe style, but people were coming together in their own time in the evenings. Before they came together, they had a chapter of a book to read. They used to choose books like Stephen Covey's Seven Habits of Highly Effective People. So it's all about personal development. They would read a chapter in the book and they would come together in the evening to discuss the book cafe style. So they would do it in small groups and then they would move around and then they would do the circle. Um, and it was his idea to do it that way. Um, it was done in people's own time. It wasn't on company time, and it was very, very popular. And it seems it spread. It was a global organization. It spread very, very widely. Um, between organizations, sorry, but between units in other countries. And I really ought to contact him and see if he's still doing it. Because often these things they start, and if the person who's driving it leaves the company, it dies
Yep.
for whatever reason. And I've
Yep.
got another good friend in works for the European Patent Office in Rotterdam, and he does something very similar.
Mm.
It hasn't. It's within everyone's power to do it if they are sufficiently motivated.
And one thing you and I were talking about another time was so let's say people do take that chance, and I do think there's a bit of a risk and a chance you're taking to like
Yeah.
switch it to conversational, and then maybe it doesn't go well. Maybe like nobody learns anything, or there's no bonding, there's no relationship building. It's just not a very decent conversation. And so then it's like, oh, you know what I mean? Like you've had that trade-off between I could have presented some stuff and everybody would have seen it, and or you took this risk of a conversation. And
Well, you
this is
can
where
still present stuff, but not so damn much.
yeah, yeah, you're just more and more efficient. Yeah. I wonder, like, again, I don't know if there's research or numbers behind it, but like, do people have more chance of losing their job because you didn't fit in with the culture, you didn't follow the PowerPoint presentations, you didn't present stuff and show how smart you are and how beautiful your slides are, and you did nothing but a bunch of conversations, and so now somebody somewhere doesn't see the value of what you did, and during the next round of layoffs, which happens every few
I hear what you're
months.
saying. Yeah.
Is
I
that
think you've got to be very politically aware and astute. And clearly, if you're in an organization where having more conversations is going to put your job at risk, but you would like to do that, maybe it's not the right organization to be
yeah,
in. But
yeah.
yeah, yes, I mean you don't necessarily do it if it's going to be if it's going to kill your job. But in most organizations, that's not the case. Well,
The funny thing is, I feel so strongly about it that I would double
you would
down.
think differently.
No, I would double down and be like, okay, so if you're at risk of losing your job, it sounds like there's some conversations that you're not a part of.
It
And
sounds like
there's
there's some conversations that really need to be had.
that need to be had, exactly. So like it's I don't
And
know.
it comes back to the favorite quotation of ours from Patricia Shaw, that I can't remember the exact wording. One aspect of leadership is to convene conversations that would not happen otherwise.
Yeah, it's a
And
favorite.
that could be brave. That could be job threatening.
Yep, could be.
But again, different levels within your own team. If you're a manager with a small team, um, you know, quite how you manage that team. You haven't got total autonomy, but you've got a lot of freedom to manage that team the way that you see fit.
I wonder if we also need to unpack, and I know we're probably coming up on time,
Yeah.
but I wonder if we need to unpack a little bit of this uh, standard challenge or divisiveness that I think it exists in a lot of people, let alone in a lot of organizations, is um, do you care about the other person? I hate to say it, but maybe I have to
Ooh.
be that direct. Do you actually have an interest in what someone else has to say? And do you care to work through the shared understanding of it? Because it could get messy, it could get yucky, it could get painful. It could not, right? It could go easy. And if I want to go really deep with that, I think we have that same divisiveness inside of each one of us.
Yeah. I
Do you
can
want
remember somebody arguing that they didn't want to do a knowledge cafe because people might actually say what they thought.
to?
That they might, they might actually say critical things about the organization.
Mhm.
My response was, well, wouldn't you like to know what those things are? Because if you don't, they're still going to have those conversations, but they're going to have them at the water cooler. They're going to have them over lunch quietly between themselves. Wouldn't you like to know what they're concerned about?
Mhm.
But apparently not.
Nope.
But you're right. Maybe that's it. Maybe that's well, not it, but a big part of it.
Mhm.
That it's just disruptive or potentially disruptive. Um, undermining the command and control of
Here's an interesting little one that I
senior
don't think we've talked
managers.
about. It's a little bit of like pay now, pay later. Um, do you, I think some people would say conversations take too long. I don't have time to involve
Yeah,
everybody and have
that's
all these
another.
perspectives. But then we know what happens, right? So then you dictate something, you put it out there, fine, and then you get pushback. People say they're going to
Yeah.
do it, or they just don't do it, or they say I'm not
Well,
going to do
that's
that,
right. Yes.
or
Yeah.
they
Exactly.
quit, or they
Exactly.
leave. So like you
Everybody goes away from the meeting, agreed, this is what we're going to do. But every single one of them is not agreed. They go away and they carry on as they always do. Or at worst, they work to, actively undermine the decision. And again, they're walking in the corridors and saying, what a what a pile of
And that's when we do our conversation groups, our C groups, we find that, if you've got a group of two, three, four people, you can sort of get to bonding and shared understanding and consensus and seeing the value in each person pretty quickly. But as soon as you've got 5, 8, 10, 12, more than 16 people in one team, one conversation, you're not looking at like hours or days. You're looking at weeks, months, years of conversation. And I think people will say, I just don't have that time. Those people will be gone before it actually happens. So why bother? Like just give them the task, get the task done.
there is a balance here between sort of distributed decision making and kind of command and control decision making. You can't. One of the things we're going to run over time, but never mind.
Go ahead.
I mean, if I go back to my corporate life, often there were meetings where the purpose of the meeting was to make a decision, and there would be two groups of people, largely speaking. I'm kind of what am I doing here? This is, it's a little bit more complex than this, but there's basically two groups. One group have already made up their mind what the decision is, and they're looking to basically impose it on the group. And the other group are not so sure. They want to have a conversation about it because they think we haven't thought about this enough, we haven't explored all the issues, and so it ends up being a great big bun fight. And usually the folks who are looking to impose their decision, they're the ones that win. So maybe half the group go away, pretty dissatisfied because they haven't had the conversation that they're looking for. Uh, my answer to that is to split such meetings into two. That you have the first meeting, which is more cafe-like, and you say this meeting isn't about making decisions. This meeting is about having an open, explorative conversation on the issue, and then we're going to come back together later today, or more likely, a week's time, And that second meeting is going to be the decision-making meeting. And that decision-making meeting clearly can be more, it can be more about debate, it can be somewhat more um, combative. But what you've got to say in that first meeting is, look, this is the only time. We've got to make a decision here. We're not going to stretch this out for weeks and months. We've got some time now here to have a conversation and explore the issues and for people to raise, people to have their voice heard, if nothing else. And then later we're going to make a decision. So that's the way I've always, and in one of my cafes, a manager actually explained that was exactly what they were doing. So it wasn't just some crazy idea of mine. But I just, again, I wonder what your thinking is on that sort of um, split.
So, so close. My mind was running as you were saying it, and I was listening. And so to remind myself, C group and passion. Um,
Hmm.
and here's what, so yes, I heard you like you get these two groups, and one is going to dictate or impose, and the other group is unsure and going to talk about it. Great. One of the things that I think you and I found, or I guess I've seen in those conversation groups, is do you remember this question? We haven't talked about this in a while. What's the conversation that this group needs to have right now?
Yeah.
It's basically an impossible question, but it's here. I just had a bit of an aha as you were talking. Um, if we're on a project team or if we're an organization, there's usually one person that gets to impose. This is what we're going to
Yes.
talk about. This is the agenda. I think part of what you and I are saying in conversational leadership is, and what we saw in C groups is, there can be one powerful person in the group who tries every time. But humans are actually like pretty amazing and pretty smart and pretty relational that if a person comes into a room, into a conversation group kind of exercise that we do and says, "Well, I think we should talk about this," or "Here's what we're going to talk about," but they don't actually feel it in their body, the group picks up on that and the group
Hmm.
ignores it. And so now
Yeah.
there's something else
Yeah.
going on until someone else either cries or yells or raises their voice or puts something into it. And what goes on in conversation group is anyone can step, you've talked about this, take responsibility for the conversation. Anyone in C group or conversational style can step in and say, here's what's going on for me. Whereas I
Yes.
think the separation
Yeah.
we're talking about inside organizations is there's only one person that has that power and that authority. No one else can step in. And if they do, they're immediately put down.
Yeah. They are.
And
That's
maybe
right.
this
Yeah.
is one of
Yeah.
those things that's like
Yeah.
out of a core of conversational leadership is that it's actually it's like before the conversation itself, where is it coming from? Who's allowed to raise that the direction of the conversation? Because I think more often than not, I'm trying to think about my clients right now. There's pretty much one person that gets to choose
Usually one person. I mean, I've
conversation.
got I've got no problem at the end of the day with one person, the person with authoritative power making a decision, because at the end of often you can't get total consensus, but
Sure.
still that responsibility for one person to make the final decision. But having had the conversations and heard the different arguments and the different perspectives, rather than simply imposing it like a certain president of yours seems
Mhm.
inclined
Mhm.
to do.
Well, so like
I
you've put
could be
it.
wrong about that. Having not
I
been behind closed doors, but
I think who knows? I think this was like a decade ago. You pointed me to that website. I don't even know if it exists. It was something like
oh
changemymind.com,
yes,
something like
yes,
that.
yes. That's an interesting site. I must go take a look at that
I
again.
haven't looked at it yet in like a long, it probably doesn't exist
That's
anymore. But
no,
the
it's. I'm pretty sure it's still there. I looked at it maybe 6 months back. It's
do
a
I
good site.
coming into the conversation, who gets to speak for who is empowered and can actually guide the conversation? Do you care about other people's points of views? And are you stubborn? Where are you on the stubborn
Mhm.
spectrum, I guess is the word, of like you are unwilling to have your mind changed? Or are you like, I haven't formed my opinion on this at all. And so it's actually easy. I need to hear lots of different things. Like, I think myself included, I often go into things thinking, no, I sort of am locked in on how I feel about this. And so it would take so much to shift.
Change your mind, yeah. And
Yeah.
that's in other words.
Yeah.
That's a good place to start, probably.
Probably. Yeah. We're
We
way past
overrun our time, John.
again.
We started out with the idea of doing this in 20 minutes. This is 30 minutes.
Yep.
Maybe in a few weeks' time, we'll be up to the hour.
An hour. Why not?
Okay, so let's stop there. Thank you, everybody who I don't think anyone's watching right now, but for everybody who comes
No
in and
one's in
watches this
chat.
later, thank you for staying with us. So.